There exists a form of inner mastery so profound that even disciplined men stop and pause in reverence when they witness it in another. Today, you will discover the ancient system that cultivates this presence. Have you ever encountered someone whose consistency seems carved from stone, who rises before dawn not through willpower, but as naturally as the sun itself? While others negotiate with their minds each morning, this person simply moves. While others collapse by the third week, they continue for years without wavering. And when you ask how they do it, they cannot explain, because they have become the practice itself. This is not motivation. This is identity reconstruction at the deepest level. The Japanese discovered this centuries ago through a discipline system so complete that it reshapes the very architecture of who you are. They call it Kaizen, but that word has been stripped of its true power in the modern world. What I will reveal today is the original system as it was practiced by samurai warriors and Zen monks, a method that doesn't rely on willpower because it eliminates the need for willpower entirely. But there is a price. This system requires you to let your old self dissolve completely. It demands that you surrender every negotiation, every excuse, every mental escape route you have ever used. The person who begins this journey is not the person who emerges from it. Before we enter this sacred knowledge, understand this. What you are about to learn has been tested not in boardrooms or gyms, but in the crucible of life and death. Samurai warriors used these principles because failure meant dishonor greater than death. Zen monks embraced them because enlightenment demanded nothing less than total surrender of the ego. The story I will tell you begins with a modern warrior named David. But it could begin with you. David was 35 years old and had been fighting the same war for 15 years. Not against an external enemy, but against the chaos within his own mind. Every Monday brought the same promise. This week will be different. This week I will wake at 5, train consistently, meditate daily, read before bed. By Wednesday, the first cracks appeared. By Friday, complete surrender. Sunday evening brought familiar shame and hollow promises about next week. He tried everything the modern world offers. Habit tracking apps that became digital graveyards of broken streaks. Accountability partners who eventually stopped responding to his texts. Motivational videos that sparked 3 days of fire, followed by ashes. Reward systems that turned into elaborate schemes for avoiding the very behaviors they were meant to encourage. David was fighting with the wrong weapons against an enemy he had never properly identified. His true opponent was not laziness or lack of motivation. His enemy was the fundamental architecture of his identity. He was someone who tried to be disciplined, not someone who simply was disciplined. And this difference, invisible to the untrained eye, was the source of his eternal struggle. The awakening came on a Tuesday morning when his alarm rang at 5:30. For the 1000th time, his mind began its familiar negotiation. You're tired. You worked late yesterday. One day won't matter, just this once. His body had not moved, but the battle was already lost. He lay there, fully conscious, watching himself choose comfort over commitment once again. In that moment of unfiltered honesty, David realized something that changed everything. He was not failing at discipline. He was succeeding perfectly at being undisciplined. His identity was consistent, predictable, unbreakable. Every action he took reinforced who he believed himself to be. A person who starts things but doesn't finish them. Someone who means well but lacks follow-through. The pattern was flawless in its execution. That evening, David began researching how warriors throughout history had solved this problem. How did samurai maintain discipline when their lives depended on it? How did monks practice for decades without missing a single day? What he discovered was a system so different from modern approaches that it felt like uncovering a lost language. In feudal Japan, there existed a concept that Western minds struggle to comprehend. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was not a set of rules to follow. It was an identity to inhabit completely. When a samurai took his vows, he did not promise to try to be honorable. He declared himself honor incarnate. The ceremony was not about making a commitment. It was about relinquishing his former self and being reborn as something new. David discovered that the most elite warriors understood something modern psychology has only recently confirmed. The human brain categorizes every behavior into one of two categories: negotiable or non-negotiable. Negotiable behaviors become mental battlegrounds where willpower fights against resistance. Non-negotiable behaviors simply happen as automatically as breathing or blinking. The samurai made their core disciplines non-negotiable through a process they called identity anchoring. This was not about changing what they did. It was about fundamentally altering who they were. A samurai did not practice sword techniques. He was the sword. A monk did not meditate. He was meditation itself. The practice and the practitioner became indistinguishable. David found records of Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman who won over 60 duels and never lost. Musashi wrote that the greatest victory was not defeating an external opponent, but achieving a state where defeat became impossible. This happened when the warrior's identity became so aligned with his practice that abandoning it would require abandoning himself completely. The secret was not in building stronger willpower. It was in creating an identity so robust that resistance became unthinkable. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom. When a behavior becomes part of your identity, it moves from the prefrontal cortex, which requires conscious effort, to the basal ganglia, which operates automatically. The brain literally rewires itself to make the practice effortless. David began to understand that his entire approach had been backward. He had been trying to force his old self to act differently. The warriors knew better. They replaced the old self entirely and built a new one from the ground up. This was not self-improvement. This was self-reconstruction. But knowing the secret and implementing it are separated by an ocean of internal resistance. When David first attempted to apply these principles, he encountered something the ancient texts called the Great Rebellion. His mind, faced with the prospect of fundamental change, marshaled every weapon in its arsenal to maintain the status quo. The rebellion began subtly. "You're being too extreme. This isn't sustainable. What will people think?" His mind presented reasonable arguments, each one designed to preserve the existing identity structure. The old self fought for its survival with the desperation of a cornered animal. David had chosen to begin with morning meditation, 20 minutes at 5 o'clock every day for 90 days. On the surface, this seemed simple enough, but his mind immediately began creating escape routes. What if you're sick? What if you have to travel? What if there's an emergency? Each question was a crack in the foundation, a way for the old patterns to creep back in. The first week was manageable because novelty provided its own energy. The second week brought the first real test. His body ached from the new sleep schedule. His mind grew restless during meditation. Every fiber of his being screamed for a return to the familiar chaos of his old morning routine. This is when most people surrender, convinced that they are not built for discipline. David discovered what the samurai called the Valley of Shadows, the period when the old identity has been disrupted, but the new one has not yet solidified. In this liminal space, every day feels like swimming upstream against a powerful current. The temptation to quit is overwhelming because the old patterns promise immediate relief from discomfort. But David had learned something from the ancient warriors that changed everything. The discomfort was not a sign that he was failing. It was proof that the transformation was working. His mind's resistance was the old identity's final defense. Every urge to quit, every rationalization, every mental negotiation was evidence that the reconstruction process had begun. The samurai understood that true strength was not the absence of resistance, but the ability to continue precisely in the presence of it. They did not try to eliminate the internal war. They out-engineered it. They fought it with weapons the old self could not counter. The most powerful weapon was identity declaration, making the commitment so public and absolute that retreat became more painful than persistence. On day 21, when David's motivation had completely evaporated and his willpower felt depleted, he encountered the principle the ancient masters considered most crucial. They called it the one path, the elimination of alternatives. Choice, they understood, is the enemy of consistency. Every time you decide whether or not to practice, you open a doorway for the old self to take command. The samurai solved this through a method known as ritual anchoring. They did not wake up and decide whether to train. The training occurred at a fixed time, in a fixed place, in a fixed sequence. The when, where, and how were locked in like steel beams in foundation. This removed the daily negotiation that destroys momentum. David applied this principle by creating what he called his sacred hour. From 5 a.m. to 5:20 a.m., the world belonged to meditation and nothing else. Not checking messages, not thinking about tasks, not reorganizing plans. Just the practice. The precision mattered because vague commitments create vague results. He prepared everything the night before. Meditation cushion in the same spot, timer set and waiting. Clothes laid out so he could move from bed to practice without a single micro-decision. The ritual became a doorway, a bridge between sleep and consciousness, carrying him across the space where resistance lived. Within 2 weeks, something remarkable happened. David began waking before his alarm, not because he was excited, but because his nervous system had begun to anticipate identity. His mind, deprived of negotiation, became quieter. The discipline began to operate independently of motivation. The practice was doing itself through him. This was the ancient meaning of effortless discipline. Not that it required no effort, but that the effort became as natural as breathing. The practice had fused with identity, to a degree where abandoning it felt like abandoning a vital organ. Then came the test, the moment that separates temporary change from irreversible transformation. A situation no one plans for, the moment life applies pressure to see if your foundation cracks. This was where the samurai system would either prove itself or crumble like every self-improvement habit David had tried before. The crisis arrived on day 43. David woke at 3 in the morning with a fever that made his bones ache. His throat felt like raw glass, every breath heavier than the last. His body pleaded for rest, and the old David would have obeyed willingly. One day off. Just this once. You deserve rest. A perfect loophole, and his past self would have stepped through it without hesitation. But as David lay there burning with fever, something extraordinary occurred. The thought to skip never fully formed. There was no debate, no bargaining, no internal courtroom. His body moved toward the meditation cushion as if pulled by a new gravitational law. Not because he felt inspired, but because the version of him who skipped meditation no longer existed. He practiced in a haze, unfocused, uncomfortable, sweating through every breath. But he practiced, and in that moment, a truth crystallized inside him like tempered steel. The quality of the practice mattered far less than the continuity of the practice. This was the secret the samurai preserved for centuries. They called it the principle of unbroken flow. Like a river that may shrink to a slow, thin trickle during drought but never loses its forward motion. Your discipline must continue no matter its strength on a given day. The moment the river stops, it ceases to be a river. It becomes a memory of where water used to run. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient principle with precision. When a behavior is repeated for 66 consecutive days, control transfers from conscious effort to automatic identity. But even a single break weakens the neural circuitry immediately. The brain reads the interruption as evidence. This behavior is optional, not essential. David found records of Zen temples that had maintained the same meditation schedule for over 800 years. Through earthquakes, through war, through famine and plague. The bell still rang. The monks still sat. They understood what modern society has forgotten. Practice does not require perfect conditions. It requires unbroken commitment despite conditions. Temple scrolls described monks meditating during raids, during evacuations, during illness, even when death was close. Not fanaticism, not martyrdom, but the deepest understanding of transformation. The gap is where the old self returns. David looked back on that fever day not as weakness, but as graduation. He had proved something irreversible. Discipline was no longer something he did. It was something he was, not dependent on mood, comfort, or convenience. A new identity had been born from friction. 2 months into his transformation, life delivered the obstacles that no motivation, no streak, and no good intention could ever prepare a person for. His daughter collapsed with sudden fever at 4 a.m. He spent the night in a hospital chair, exhausted and afraid. A week later, airline delays left him stranded in an airport for 12 hours. Then, an emergency call from his mother at midnight requiring him to drive across the city immediately. Each situation was unique, unpredictable, and perfectly engineered to break him. This is where most transformations die. Not from weakness, but from exceptions disguised as necessity. David discovered what ancient warriors called the trap of exceptions. Your mind, desperate to preserve old patterns, begins manufacturing beautiful reasons to break your practice. You're being a good father. Skip today. You're traveling. You deserve rest. It's an emergency. Discipline can wait. Each exception feels noble, righteous, even responsible, and that is why it is lethal. It doesn't break you violently. It breaks you quietly, one justified exception at a time. The samurai knew this psychological ambush well and developed a counterweapon so powerful it seems unreal. They called it the way of pre-decided paths. Before obstacles appear, the response is already chosen and written into identity. When X happens, I do Y. No thinking, no evaluation, no internal courtroom, just execution. David created response paths for every foreseeable disruption. Sick child, 5 minutes meditation in hospital waiting room. Airport delays, meditation with headphones near gate 42. Travel, bodyweight practice beside hotel bed. Chaos, do half practice, not zero. The details didn't matter. The continuity did. The power of this system was more than practical. It was psychological recoding. Once the brain knows there is no scenario in which practice stops, it stops searching for escape routes. It stops arguing. It stops negotiating. The energy once wasted resisting discipline instead begins fueling discipline. You become anti-fragile, gaining strength where others break. A Harvard study on habit continuation discovered something remarkable. People who created pre-decided responses were 300% more likely to maintain discipline long-term, not because they were stronger, but because they removed the need to be strong. They removed choice. And choice is where the old self lives. 1 year after beginning, David no longer recognized the man in his own reflection. Not because circumstances changed, but because the internal architecture had been rebuilt. He didn't meditate. He was meditation. He didn't practice discipline. Discipline moved through him like breath. When crises came, others panicked, while David remained still as a mountain. Colleagues whispered, "He never shakes." Family observed, "Nothing breaks him anymore." When asked how he changed, David could not explain. For how do you describe breathing to someone who has never noticed their own breath? The ancient masters called this state Kaizen Ichi. Practitioner and practice become one. No separation between action and identity. No resistance. No negotiation. Only being. David rose before dawn, not through willpower, but through inevitability. As tides return to shore, as spring returns to earth. His identity had hardened like forged steel. This level of transformation has a cost. When your consistency becomes absolute, others become uncomfortable. Your existence becomes a mirror reflecting their inconsistency. Some will admire you. Some will resent you. Some will try to soften you to protect their comfort. Every reaction is proof that you have crossed the threshold. You stand now where David once stood. 2 paths lie before you. Stay as one who tries to be disciplined, always beginning, always collapsing, always restarting, or die to the old identity and rise as someone discipline cannot refuse. The Kaizen system awaits, forged by centuries of warriors, validated by modern neuroscience, ready to reconstruct your life from the inside out. The question is not, does this work? Now it's your turn to step onto the path. In the comments below, declare the identity you choose to embody from this day forward. Not a goal, not a plan, an identity. Who do you become when hesitation ends? Write it, seal it, and let this be the first step of your own unbreakable self.